Do you believe a single bark could shake an entire system of faith? During a solemn ceremony inside an old cathedral, as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows like beams from heaven, one sound, sharp and sudden like a blade, tore through that sacred silence. Just one bark, but it was not alone. A sheepdog, silent but perceptive, saw what no one else in that congregation did. And, from that single gaze, a secret buried within the church for over 20 years began to crack open. Blood, lies, betrayed faith. It was not a confession. It was not forensic evidence. It was instinct and the loyal, honest eyes that could never lie. This story might send chills down your spine and leave you haunted by the meaning of the word faith. Watch until the end and share your thoughts if you have ever once trusted the eyes of a creature that seemed to only follow orders. This is a place where justice can still speak even when humans choose silence. The air inside the church felt frozen. The wooden pews creaked with every movement from the worshippers. Wind whispered through the tall ceiling, making the candle flames quiver. Inside, prayers echoed in rhythm with the steady breathing of the crowd. At the pulpit stood Pastor Gabriel, dressed in a spotless white robe, holding a cross high above his head. His voice rang out with calm authority. The one who carries sin shall be cleansed by the light and the silence. Rex, a silver-gray sheepdog, lay still at the base of a stone pillar, calm as always. He belonged to old night watchman Jackson, a man most people barely noticed. But within seconds, everything changed. A sudden sound rang out, sharp, piercing, unnatural. Rex jumped up, growling deep from his throat, eyes locked on the pulpit. He lunged toward the pastor, paws sliding across the stone floor. A child burst into tears. A woman crossed herself repeatedly. Murmurs spread. The whole church seemed to shatter into panic. But Gabriel did not move an inch. He stared at the dog with a cold, unreadable expression, showing no sign of fear, as if he had been waiting for this moment. From the back, Jackson rushed forward and grabbed Rex. "Rex, come on now," he whispered, but his grip slowly loosened. Because Rex was not insane. He was trying to say something the only way he knew how, by barking. Gabriel stepped down from the pulpit, raising his hand as if to bless. But the moment his hand reached toward the space near Rex's snout, the dog instantly backed away, growling, eyes sharp with suspicion, as if he sensed something that did not belong in this sacred place. Then a small sound echoed, like a rusty hinge creaking, from behind the altar. Jackson froze. His ear twitched, a reflex born from years on the battlefield. He turned his head just in time to see Gabriel glance toward the noise, and then just as quickly the pastor's face returned to calm, too fast for most to notice. The ceremony ended. The congregation left, but Rex refused to go. He sat silently by the stone wall, eyes fixed on the altar, unblinking. Night fell. The old church sank into stillness. Jackson sat alone in the watchman's room behind the bell tower, flipping through the worn pages of his Bible. Rex was not at his feet like usual. He stood by the window motionless, as if keeping watch. Near midnight, a bark broke the silence. Short, sharp, precise. Jackson jumped up, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped to the window. Under the pale moonlight cast across the stone courtyard, he saw a figure in a pastor's robe dragging a heavy black sack toward the stone cellar door behind the church. Slowly, quietly, as if he had done this many times before. Jackson did not look away. His hand clenched the window frame. His heart pounded, not from fear, but because he recognized that scent, the scent of lies, the acrid sting, the smell of blood not yet dry. Rex stepped beside him. Silently, calmly, no barking, just staring, deep, intense, as if asking, "Do you believe me now?" Jackson nodded, and in the eyes of that old soldier, long thought extinguished, a spark flickered to life again. Faint, but bright enough to guide him through the darkness. Jackson Keller looked like a man who had lost everything, but inside him was a battlefield that had never stopped burning. No one really knew where he came from. His military file said he was born in 1959 in Georgia and enlisted at the age of 18. But most of his background was marked classified. People in Auburn Ridge only knew he showed up about 10 years ago, renting a cheap mobile home on the edge of the woods and living quietly like a shadow. Jackson never married, had no children, no relatives. Every morning he walked nearly 3 miles, about 5 kilometers, to St. Clair Church, always with a one-eyed dog by his side. Whether in the freezing cold or under the scorching sun, he never complained. He silently mopped the floors, fixed the lights, stood guard through the night, living as if invisible. But that silence was only on the surface. Late at night, some had seen his flashlight flicker beneath the church floor or spotted him sitting motionless on the steps, breathing heavily as if wrestling something no one else could see. That was Jackson, a former soldier fighting with memories that refused to heal. He had once served as a canine handler in the Marine Corps, working with a military dog on bomb detection, tracking, and raids. During one mission in Afghanistan, his unit was ambushed. 8 men died. Only Jackson and Rex survived, carrying scars both physical and emotional. A bullet was still lodged in his leg, and the wound in his mind never let him sleep through the night. After being discharged, he moved to Auburn Ridge and took a quiet job at the old church, maybe out of guilt, maybe seeking redemption. Every night he and Rex walked through the empty aisles, scrubbing every stain like they were scrubbing the past clean. But ever since Pastor Gabriel arrived, Rex had started growling whenever the man came near. Jackson felt uneasy, like standing before an enemy officer dressed as a priest. Rex became increasingly restless. On Sunday nights, when the lights were off, the dog would stare at the cellar door and whimper. Jackson began taking notes. He even secretly installed a camera in the prayer room, something he had never done out of respect for the sacred space. And then one night, the camera captured something strange. Gabriel quietly went down into the church cellar at 2 o'clock in the morning, carrying a large black bag, looking like he was dragging a body. No one else was there. No lights, just him and the darkness. Rex was never an ordinary dog, and perhaps never meant to be. From the moment he began training at Quantico, he was molded into a living weapon, lightning reflexes, an ultra-sensitive nose, and above all, unshakable loyalty, the kind that meant he would die to protect his handler. For 7 years in the Middle East, Rex and Jackson were more than teammates, they were battle brothers. Rex once sniffed out a deeply buried bomb, just from the faint trace of nitrate in the wind. He once charged a sniper, saving Jackson's life. But what made him a legend was not just his skills, it was his eyes, sharp, aware, and full of emotion. Jackson used to say if he could talk, he'd be promoted to major. Now, at 13 years old, an old age for a Malinois Rex had slowed down. One eye blinded by shrapnel, a limp in his hind leg, his steps were unsteady. But his instincts had only grown sharper. Since they moved to St. Clair Church, Rex hardly left Jackson's side. By day, he lay quietly at his feet. At night, he patrolled the shadowy halls. But everything changed when Pastor Gabriel arrived. At first, Rex just growled softly. But over time, whenever Gabriel came near, the dog would leap up, yank at his leash bark, fiercely, his fur bristling. Once, he nearly tore the man's pant leg. Gabriel just gave a cold smile, calling him a mad beast. But Jackson knew Rex was not mad. He was sensing something humans could not. At night, Rex often stood watch in front of the sealed cellar door, a place so dark it felt cursed. He did not howl. He did not whine. He just stared into the blackness like it had once held something evil. Whenever there was a strange noise, his ears would twitch and he would growl low, the same growl he gave right before detecting explosives. Like Jackson Rex carried PTSD. Some nights he would suddenly start howling, run in circles, bury his head into a corner. Jackson had to hold him tight, whispering like calming a child. One time, thunder made him panic and crash into a cabinet, reopening an old wound. Blood flowed. To Jackson, that scar was not just an injury, it was a symbol of sacrifices unspoken, of loyalty unrewarded. Rex was the last comrade he had left, and now they were about to enter a new war, not with bullets, but just as deadly. Tucked away from the main part of Auburn Ridge, St. Clair Church looked like something from a forgotten fairy tale, an ancient ruin hidden among sparse trees. Step inside once, and you would feel its eerie age wrap around you like cold mist. Built in the 19th century by Irish monks, its walls were nearly 3 feet thick, about 1 meter, with Gothic arches and stained glass that had long since dulled. In daylight, St. Clair wore a robe of sacred history, but at night it transformed into something living, breathing the rhythm of darkness. The wooden floor groaned, stone walls wept, and wind hissed through the cracks like whispers from forgotten souls. Every Sunday morning, sunlight poured through the stained glass cross, filling the air with incense. People knelt, hands folded gently. But when the door slammed shut and the last bell rang, the atmosphere turned cold and heavy, carrying a nameless foreboding. Jackson once called it a mausoleum painted with the colors of heaven. Behind the holy statues were cracks. Beneath each tile were signs of old drilling. Inside, he discovered a second wall sealed with rough cement, as if someone had tried to hide something inside. At the end of the sanctuary was a locked iron door leading down to a basement that once stored communion wine and scripture books. But since Pastor Gabriel took over, it had been declared off-limits due to collapse risk. Still, Jackson had heard the lock turning at night, the dragging of something heavy. A foul, damp odor, sometimes like blood, seeped through the cracks, and Rex reacted violently every time they passed by, howling, growling, scratching the stone floor, as if trying to dig through it. Jackson once pressed his ear to the floor and he heard breathing, soft, deep, and rapid, like someone trapped down below. Elders in town shared whispers that the church once hid unwanted children, that a priest had hanged himself in the bell tower, and that 3 people had vanished near the grounds, but no one dared investigate. To question the church is to offend God. 86-year-old Bertha, who lived near the cemetery, once said at a town meeting, "Every night I hear children singing prayers inside the chapel, but the church is locked and Gabriel sleeps in the rectory." People laughed it off, called her senile, but Jackson did not. Gabriel arrived in Auburn Ridge like a fresh breeze, replacing the recently deceased Pastor Parkinson. From the moment he first stood at the pulpit, the town was captivated, a warm, steady voice, a calm gaze, and sermons so profound they brought tears. He spoke like a father, gentle yet unnervingly precise, as if he had witnessed the darkest corners of the human soul. People felt forgiven, cleansed, enlightened. He was a hypnotist with scripture. The town needed a spiritual leader, and Gabriel, with his priestly charm and compassionate air, was exactly that. But Jackson, with the instincts of a soldier, began to investigate. Gabriel's background was suspiciously flawless, studied theology in Europe, no clear location served at a parish that no longer existed, no family photos, no social media, no one who had known him before. It was as if he had been born from nothing. And those eyes were what unsettled Jackson the most. Deep blue but empty. No joy, no sorrow, no feeling. Like a biological mask programmed to look human. Gabriel soon restructured the church's entire ritual system. Instead of traditional ceremonies, he introduced the awakening long, immersive meditations, guiding worshippers to visualize the temple within. After service, many claimed they heard something, felt like their name was being called from the other side, and could not sleep from guilt. They called it healing. Jackson called it manipulation. The town changed day by day. Cheerful folks grew withdrawn. Teenagers stopped going out. Some families pulled their kids from school. Father Gabriel will teach them enough. And then, people began disappearing. 2 young women, former volunteers, vanished within a month. The police investigated, then closed the case. No signs of foul play. Gabriel spoke from the pulpit. God has a plan. Do not question, just believe. And the entire congregation nodded. Only Jackson and Rex did not. Until one night. The secret camera Jackson had installed captured Gabriel entering the cellar at 2 in the morning. No lights, no one else, carrying a long black bag like it held a body. The hinges creaked. He disappeared into the darkness. The footage ended, but for Jackson, it was enough. The first night Rex acted differently was a damp, drizzling evening. Jackson was sweeping the hallway behind the chapel, the darkest part of St. Clair Church. The flickering fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling cast a cold, eerie glow, making the statues of saints throw shadows on the stone walls like twisted, demonic figures. Rex stopped in his tracks. He no longer followed Jackson as usual, but froze about 10 steps from the stairwell that led to the basement. His single cloudy eye glinted with a strange orange hue in the dim light. He growled low and deep, the kind of growl Jackson had only heard once before, during an ambush in Kandahar. "Rex, come here," Jackson called softly. The dog did not move, his back-arched, fur-bristling claws lightly scraping the tile as if struggling to hold back. He did not bark. He did not howl. He just stared at the locked iron door and growled. That night marked the beginning of a string of unsettling changes. Every time Pastor Gabriel entered the church, whether from a distance or up close, Rex would snarl, yanking violently at his leash as if trying to charge. One Sunday, he nearly knocked over an entire pew trying to break free, charging straight toward Gabriel, walking down the main aisle. People thought it was an accident. Gabriel only smiled, bent down to pet Rex, and whispered something Jackson could not quite hear. From there, things only got worse. Rex refused to sleep in the room like he used to. Instead, he lay outside on the mobile home's porch. Eyes wide open, ears perked, his whole body tense as a bowstring every time a sound echoed from the church. Some nights he scratched violently at the wall, howled, then backed away, growling faintly as if threatening something invisible. Jackson began to lose sleep not because of the noise, but because of the rising dread spreading through his chest. He did not know what he was afraid of. Gabriel, the church, or himself, slowly losing control. One early morning while checking the church grounds, Rex suddenly lunged at a young paperboy walking past the church fence. He did not bite, just leapt forward, snarling, pinning the boy against the wall, who burst into tears. It took all of Jackson's strength to pull Rex back. The boy ran off, leaving behind his bike and a scattered stack of newspapers. From that moment, Jackson began to ask, was Rex seeing something he could not? Day by day, the air around the church felt thicker, not with old mold, but with some invisible tension, as if something beneath the ground was preparing to rise, twisting the tiles, slowing time itself. One night, while wiping down the altar, Jackson heard claws scraping across the stone floor. He turned. Rex stood at the basement door, growling, and from the other side of that door came a sound. Breathing. Soft, long, rapid. No one else heard it, but Rex knew. and Jackson understood the war was over, but a new battle was beginning, right beneath their feet. The storage room of St. Clair Church sat at the end of the west corridor, where the ceiling lights barely reached and the stone walls exhaled cold moisture like the lungs of an ancient corpse. Every step Jackson took echoed with a hollow clack in the thick silence. He had always disliked this place, the smell of rotting paper, mildewed wood, and dust mixed like a buried fear. But Rex had growled non-stop the night before, and Jackson could not stay idle any longer. Hidden behind a mountain of old files, an abandoned ceiling-mounted security camera still clung to the wall, a rusted eye covered in dust. Jackson unscrewed the casing, checked the wiring, wiped the circuit boards with a damp cloth. After nearly 3 hours of meticulous work, he spliced it into an old power source. The CRT monitor flickered to life with a dry click. A pale blue light glowed across his wrinkled face like a ghost being summoned. The red rec light blinked. The system still worked. The storage room of St. Clair Church sat at the end of the west corridor, where the ceiling lights barely reached and the stone walls exhaled cold moisture like the lungs of an ancient corpse. Every step Jackson took echoed with a hollow clack in the thick silence. He had always disliked this place, the smell of rotting paper, mildewed wood, and dust mixed like a buried fear. But Rex had growled non-stop the night before, and Jackson could not stay idle any longer. Hidden behind a mountain of old files, an abandoned ceiling-mounted security camera still clung to the wall, a rusted eye covered in dust. Jackson unscrewed the casing, checked the wiring, wiped the circuit boards with a damp cloth. After nearly 3 hours of meticulous work, he spliced it into an old power source. The CRT monitor flickered to life with a dry click. A pale blue light glowed across his wrinkled face like a ghost being summoned. The red REC light blinked. The system still worked. On the screen were grainy black and white video clips, blurry, but still just clear enough to send a chill down the spine. Jackson fast-forwarded to the time when Rex would growl every night. 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday. The frame lit up a tall figure cloaked in black hooded. The person did not turn on any lights, did not make a sound, moved slowly as if intimately familiar with every tile. They walked to the basement door, pulled out a key, inserted it, and opened the door with the ease of habit. Jackson gripped the console tightly as he watched a long object being dragged behind the figure, a large black bag limp heavy, like it carried a human body. There was no audio, but in Jackson's mind he could hear the hinges squealing. Before the screen faded into complete darkness, he breathed hard, rewound, paused, marked the time angle frame count. Then backed up the footage to a USB, zipped it in his coat pocket, and walked out hands cold, as if he had just touched the metal of an invisible coffin. The next morning, Jackson presented the footage to the church office, but he did not get the shock he expected. The head administrator glanced at the screen, exchanged looks with the two people behind her. No questions, no surprise, just, "We will take care of it. Thank you." Jackson left confused. An hour later, he returned. The office was locked. When he asked to speak with them again, they said there was no footage. That camera has not worked in years. Then gently suggested he take a few weeks off to rest. No one met his eyes. That night, Jackson returned to the storage room. In silence, he dismantled the entire camera system, removed the hard drive, pulled the cables. He packed everything into a steel box, locked it tight, then buried it beneath a rotten floorboard. On top, he taped a slip of paper with the date and time, written in red ink. When he returned home, Rex was sitting at the door awake. He stood as Jackson approached, softly, nudging his nose against Jackson's hand, as if to ask, "You saw it, didn't you?" Jackson said nothing, but in his heart he knew part of the truth had surfaced, and next time, no one would be able to bury it again. It began on a damp afternoon. The clouds hung low and the trees around the church drooped with the weight of the previous night's rain. Jackson was adjusting the lock on the bell tower room when he heard bicycle tires crunch over the wet gravel. The boy Theo was around 10 years old, the son of a family living near the Eastern Cemetery. Bright eyes, messy hair, always smiling, and often helped arrange hymn books after Mass. That day, Theo came early. Through the camera Jackson had installed near the back gate, one of the few precautions he took. Once things got strange, he saw the boy park his bike by the fence, shove his hoodie into his backpack, and step inside the church. That was the last image. No one panicked at first. Kids often wandered around the church or into the woods. But as night fell and Theo did not return, and his mother came pounding on Jackson's door, nearly hysterical, he knew something was wrong. He checked a hidden camera he had installed in the hallway behind the sanctuary, leading toward the old cellar door. No one else knew about it, and what he saw chilled his blood. At 2:09 in the afternoon, Theo appeared on screen, walking slowly down the hallway, holding a small book. He paused, glanced to the side as if he had heard a distant voice calling out. Then, without a moment of hesitation, he turned and walked straight into the area behind the red velvet curtain where the cellar door was hidden. After that, the screen went completely dark, swallowed by shadows. Jackson rushed to show the footage to Pastor Gabriel. He expected urgency calls to the police, a search party. But Gabriel watched it once, then calmly said, "Do not cause a stir. Children often play hide and seek. The boy will return." 3 days passed. No sign of Theo. Police arrived. They searched the churchyard, the bushes, the storage sheds. Their conclusion was brief: no evidence of a crime. The boy likely ran away. The case was closed in a silence that felt too deliberate, but Jackson could not remain silent. He replayed the footage again and again, pausing at a nearly missed frame on the far right between two stone pillars, a tall figure in a black cloak. Just a glimpse, but unmoving like a statue. No light reflected off it, as if it did not belong to this world. The velvet curtain near the cellar door, the moment Theo vanished, swayed gently, though the hallway had no draft. That detail made Jackson's skin crawl. The next day, the security camera was gone. Not broken, just gone. Jackson asked around. No one knew. No one had seen. People inside the church had grown strange, distant quiet. Then Gabriel announced a prayer for the lost souls. During the service, no one mentioned Theo. No questions. Only Gabriel standing at the pulpit reading a strange passage in an ancient tongue no parishioner understood. Some elderly folks trembled, clasped their hands, eyes watery, as if an old memory had returned. Rex did not sit still the entire ceremony. He stood firm, eyes locked on the pulpit, growling low as if an instinct deeper than thought warned him of something unholy. And Jackson, standing at the back, clenched his fists, his eyes never leaving Gabriel. He knew faith was no longer enough to hide the darkness, and St. Clair Church, the symbol of salvation, was quietly devouring the souls of an entire town in its silence. He could not wait any longer. That night, exactly at midnight, as the church bells echoed dryly through the suffocating dark, Jackson put on his faded military jacket, the same one that had shielded him from gunfire in the Middle East, and left his mobile home. Rex walked beside him without command. Two aging shadows moved across the churchyard under a starless sky, with only the wind howling through the trees. The front door was locked, but Jackson knew every stone, every hidden path. He slipped through a small northern window, its hinges rusted long ago, and entered the church like a ghost. He did not turn on the lights, only a faint red beam from his flashlight guided their steps. They crept past the altar, pressed tight against the stone columns. At the basement door, Jackson pulled out a key, a duplicate he had secretly made after the first clues had appeared. Click. The door creaked open with a groan like something dying. Cold air rose from below like a breath from hell. Mold rusted metal, and somewhere beneath it, the stench of rotting flesh. Jackson stepped down, each footstep echoing like memories from another lifetime. The church basement unfolded like a hidden temple, damp stone walls, flickering candles casting shaky light. In the center, 4 wooden cabinets, etched with a cross marked out by a slash. In the middle, a stone coffin, its lid pushed open. Empty. As Jackson bent to inspect the cabinets, he heard footsteps. Multiple. Steady. Unhurried. Rex snarled. From the dark corridors, 6 figures emerged, dressed in black faces hidden behind silver masks, each holding iron rods. On their chests, a symbol, a cross, pierced by a blade. "You should not be here, Mr. Keller." The voice came from the figure in the center, calm, even-toned, like the stone walls themselves had spoken. Jackson clenched his fists. "Who are you, the Eucharistic Purification Order? And you have stepped into a place where light is not welcome." "Where is the boy?" Jackson shouted. Silence. Then the figure stepped forward, removed his mask. Jackson froze. It was the assistant administrator, the same man who greeted him every morning, the man who had taken the newspaper from Theo a week ago. There are things, Mr. Keller, that must remain buried, and some people must stay silent to preserve order. This is a church, not a battlefield. You're wrong. This is a battlefield. Between the light and what is crawling up from the deepest tombs. One of the masked men stepped forward, reaching toward Jackson's coat pocket, where he had hidden the hard drive with the footage. But Rex lunged. His growl tore through the stone, his jaws clamping down on the man's wrist. Blood splattered. Jackson seized the moment. He stepped back, shouting, "Rex, fall back!" Together they sprinted up the stairs. Behind them came the sound of rods clashing on stone, footsteps scraping, and a voice barking out in a language ancient and cruel. Jackson slammed the door shut, wedging a heavy metal bar across it. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping arms wrapped around Rex, now lightly injured. War had returned. But this time, the enemy wore no uniform. They wore robes, called themselves clergy, and hid within the sacred stone walls of the church. When Gabriel smiled from the pulpit that Sunday morning, no one knew that the man had once lived a completely different life behind heavy concrete walls, where war did not end with bullets, but with horrific experiments on the human soul. Jackson could not shake the image of Gabriel's eyes, bottomless, unmoved, and devoid of feeling. After the confrontation with the Eucharistic Purification Order in the basement, Jackson made a call to Reggie Stokes, an old friend from his military days, now living off-grid in an abandoned phone relay station in New Mexico. 3 days later, a package wrapped tightly in oiled cloth appeared at Jackson's doorstep. There was no return address, just a single line, written on the outside, "Open this, when no one believes you anymore." Inside was a thick yellowed military file, stamped in bold "Top Secret," not for internal distribution. The file carried a code TGC-12, the God Cleanser. The first page featured a photo of Gabriel, much younger, head-shaved, wearing a white medical coat, standing among a group of handcuffed prisoners. In the bottom right corner was a red stamp, Camp Ghazi, 2004, United States Marine Corps. Jackson flipped through the pages. Each one felt like a stab to the memory. Gabriel's real name, Dr. Elias Marrow, a military psychiatrist originally tasked with treating PTSD in Special Forces operatives. But over time, he stopped healing and began cleansing the soul. The file detailed horrifying accounts of ritualistic procedures masked as spiritual therapy, forcing prisoners to kneel for 12 hours in pitch-black rooms, blasting scripture through high-powered speakers, binding limbs with barbed cords, and starving them for 3 days with a single mantra: the sinful must be stripped bare to receive the light. Some prisoners went mad. One gouged out his own eyes. Another smashed his head against the wall until he died. Gabriel documented everything, labeling the behaviors as spiritual responses of a decaying soul. His hands never trembled. Jackson clenched the file as he flipped to the final pages. A dismissal order signed by 2 generals read, "Dr. Elias Marrow is hereby discharged for extreme religious-based human rights violations. Security monitoring is advised should subject reappear within civilian religious systems." No one knew where he went after that. No one investigated further. Files like these often got buried in the layers of military bureaucracy. But Jackson knew the truth. The man never stopped. He merely changed costumes, from a white lab coat to a priest's black robe, from a prison camp to a church pulpit, and his crimes now draped in scripture and candlelight. At that exact moment, Rex let out a low, mournful howl outside the door. A long, drawn-out sound, like he too had read the truth Jackson now held in his hands. After reading the classified file, Jackson began tracing the last threads. He followed old email addresses, tracked the military code TGC-12, and uncovered an anonymous account once used to send psychological reports not to the Department of Defense, but to a private server housed in an abandoned monastery in New Orleans. The name associated with it, Soul Cleansing. Jackson had been part of many black ops. He knew when nameless organizations existed, it meant they were long accustomed to hiding. What Gabriel now led was no ordinary church. It was a machine for spiritual filtration. Gabriel was not just preaching, he was recruiting. Through rural parishes, rehab centers, orphanages, and shelters, Gabriel traveled like a wandering priest. But behind him was an entire network gathering society's discarded souls, homeless people, runaway kids, ex-convicts, the mentally ill. Those nobody would miss. And then he performed soul-cleansing rituals. According to Reggie's intel, these rituals were never public. They took place in church basements. First came 3 days of fasting, then 12 hours of kneeling, blindfolded ears plugged in a sealed room while scripture blasted over loudspeakers. Those who collapsed were said to have fallen to their sins. Their bodies were labeled atoned vessels and buried beneath crypts called the Eucharistic Foundations. Reggie once planted an agent inside the congregation. The man lasted 4 days. Before he vanished, he sent one final encrypted line: "There's blood, but it isn't fresh." Gabriel did not act alone. By his side was a group called the Eucharistic Purification Order, cloaked in black, their identities unknown, bearing the sigil of a cross split by a blade. They guarded, cleaned, and carried out the rituals. No one knew who they were, only that they never left the church grounds. At St. Clair, Jackson had seen shadowy figures moving at night. He thought his eyes were playing tricks, but now he understood. This church, built atop an old cemetery, was the perfect hiding place for a ritual the world could never be allowed to see. Jackson started printing documents, mapping out every link in the web Gabriel had built. He pinned photos, drew red strings, sketched diagrams across a whiteboard in his bedroom, like a hunter mapping a nest. Every place Gabriel had been connected to, at least one unsolved disappearance. Reggie sent one more audio file captured by a drone that once flew over an abandoned reform camp. Gabriel's voice echoed not a sermon, but a question to new initiates. Are you ready for your fallen soul to be stripped away, so the light may enter? Behind his voice were groans, crying, chains scraping across stone. Jackson stared at the map, his finger resting on a red circle drawn around St. Clair. He understood this was not just a church, it was a forge where Gabriel continued the work he began in wartime. And this time, no one was stopping him. The wind howled outside St. Clair, but Jackson paid it no mind. He was plugging an old USB into the back of the church's internal audio server, a system only the pastor was supposed to access. The server room was hidden behind a wood-paneled wall, secured with a passcode Jackson had memorized when Gabriel had once slipped. After hours of searching, he finally found a folder labeled Ordo Lux, Order of Light. Inside were over 20 videos, no titles, just numbers. Jackson opened one dated 3 days prior. The screen revealed a chilling scene, a small damp basement lit by flickering candles. At the center, a 14-year-old boy, thin, blindfolded hands bound, knelt on blood-stained stone. Surrounding him were 4 black-robed figures wearing masks shaped like split crosses. A deep voice spoke unmistakably Gabriel's. As the blood rises, the darkness recedes. A ceremonial blade was drawn. The boy trembled violently. No one spoke. Only the cold, monotone chant of scripture echoed over and over again. Jackson was frozen. His hands trembled. Rex, lying beside him, suddenly perked up, ears high, and let out a piercing howl. He growled like the scent of blood had somehow pierced through the screen, waking something primal deep within. The video then showed the robed figures carrying the boy out. He was not dead, but he did not resist. Jackson rewound, analyzed the movements. This was not a murder. This was a ritual designed to shatter the soul. Then came another clip, a different room. A middle-aged woman, hair-matted, eyes hollow, knelt inside a circle of salt and inverted crosses. She repeated, "I have seen the light. I have seen the light," over and over. Jackson turned off the screen. He dry-heaved, gripping the edge of the table. Rex still howled, eyes wild, distant, as if remembering something ancient, a battlefield, a body, a flood of blood. At the bottom of one video was a note for those who pass the final trial only. Jackson knew this was evidence, but also a death sentence if discovered. He copied the entire folder, hid the USB inside his boot, and wiped all traces from the server. He returned to the security room, bolted the door, and backed up the data again on an old laptop. He opened another video, this time a group of teenagers kneeling before an altar, mouths duct-taped, eyes bulging with fear. One tried to scream, but no sound came out. A gloved hand reached from behind, pressing on the boy's head. Gabriel's voice again. No one enters heaven without shedding their old soul. Rex did not howl this time. He stood upright, fur on end eyes, locked on the screen, entranced. Jackson had to snap him out of it. But Rex's eyes, they no longer showed fear. They showed rage. A kind of rage Jackson had never seen even on the battlefield in Afghanistan. Under one of the videos, Jackson discovered a QR code. When he scanned it, a single sentence appeared. The foundation of heaven is built on the bodies of doubters. Jackson knew he was out of time. The videos on that USB were evidence, but also a declaration of war. The police would not believe him. The congregation would not believe him. One wrong move and he would be labeled a lunatic trespassing on sacred ground. But if he did nothing more, people would disappear. So he turned to the only thing he ever truly knew, what he had learned as an old soldier. He began planning a return infiltration of the basement beneath St. Clair Church, the altar of blood, where Gabriel had performed his twisted rituals for years. No squad, no uniform, just grit training and a loyal old dog who had never left his side. Jackson opened the wooden chest hidden under his bed. Inside were items he had not touched since his discharge: a combat knife, an old tranquilizer pistol, a few trackers, mini cameras, zip ties, and a weathered leather notebook filled with every survival and counter-infiltration tactic he had learned over 20 years in the military. He began modifying them, turning each item into his own version of a Home Alone toolkit, but for an old man. On the wall of his bedroom, he taped a hand-drawn map of the basement, sketched from old church blueprints. Every camera blind spot, every emergency exit, every steel door was clearly marked. He identified 3 objectives: find and rescue any survivors, broadcast the video footage live online, and confront Gabriel face to face. He fitted Rex with a micro camera around his collar, along with a GPS tracker. Though old Rex's sense of smell was still razor sharp, he would lead the way. Jackson packed 2 red beam flashlights to avoid detection, a signal booster for live streaming, and a backup tranquilizer syringe for emergencies. The night before the operation, Jackson spent hours training Rex in the backyard. He used the flashlight to simulate the flickering lights in the basement, conditioning Rex to respond to visual cues instead of sound, because down there, scripture would be blasting non-stop to overwhelm the senses. Within 3 hours, Rex had mastered the signals. He was slower now, but his accuracy had not faded. Jackson used dried meat biscuits as rewards, and every time Rex stopped at the marked point, Jackson nodded his eyes, flashing like he had just reunited with an old comrade in the middle of enemy lines. Afterward, Jackson stood in the bathroom staring into the mirror. A tired old man with hollow cheeks, silver hair, and scars. But his eyes, still sharp, still focused, still the eyes of a soldier. "No one will save them if you don't," he whispered to himself. He packed everything into a gardening tool backpack. The weapons were disguised: his knife hidden in a water nozzle, his flashlight tucked into a bug spray bottle, his camera inside a deodorant can. He even stitched together a fire-resistant raincoat in case the basement was filled with chemical agents. That night, he left home quietly. With Rex at his side, they followed a narrow, overgrown trail behind the church, a path no parishioner knew about, but Jackson had found on an old town map. The moonlight was just bright enough to light their way. The gate behind the old morgue was rusted. The hinges let out a faint whine as he cut through the chain lock. No one saw them. They entered the inner courtyard, once a holy relic garden, now overrun with weeds and crumbling statues. The silence was so deep even Rex's breath sounded like the beat of a war drum. They reached the old cellar door, the one that led to the lowest level, where only Gabriel and the Eucharistic Purification Order were allowed. Jackson taped over the sensors, placed rubber padding on the lock mechanism to muffle the sound. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped the cold metal handle, but his eyes never blinked. The door creaked open. A wave of cold air rushed up from below like the breath of hell itself. Mold, earth, and the unmistakable tang of dried blood. Rex stepped forward first. No barking, no growling, just a steady, silent walk like he knew destiny had led them here. Jackson followed, flashlight in hand. Every step was a vow. No turning back, no retreat. The operation had begun. Jackson and Rex moved like shadows through the old stone basement. Every step was deliberate. Jackson's red flashlight swept across damp walls and rotting bricks through air so thick it felt like it had not held oxygen in decades. Behind the door they had just passed, Rex growled low a signal. Jackson knew the dog had picked up something, footsteps, a breath maybe, just the vibration of movement. He raised 2 fingers, stop. A faint rattle of chains echoed from the left corridor. 2 silhouettes flickered in the darkness. Jackson pressed to the wall, slipped off his jacket, and hid behind a stone pedestal. Rex dropped flat to the ground. A guard appeared, black robe, cracked cross mask, holding an electric stun baton. He moved slowly, scanning the hallway. Jackson waited. As the figure turned his back, Jackson lunged. One hand smashed the flashlight into the guard's neck, the other clamped his mouth shut. The man collapsed without a sound. Jackson dragged him behind the column. No gunfire, no barking. Silence, the oath of an old soldier. They reached the door to the ceremonial chamber, a massive rusted iron gate, its symbols worn to near invisibility. Jackson pulled out a custom lockpick, a battery-powered file hidden in a hollow syringe. In 2 minutes, the lock clicked open. Cold air seeped out, reeking of decay. A spiral staircase led down. At the bottom was flickering firelight and chanting. Rex stopped. He gave a sharp, quiet growl. Jackson followed his gaze. Above them, in a crack in the wall, a hidden security camera. Jackson activated a military-grade jammer he had kept from the Fallujah counterinsurgency days. The feed was cut. They stepped inside. By firelight, they saw it. A girl bound and blindfolded lay on a stone slab, lips moving in silent prayer. Around her stood 8 black-robed cultists. At the center, Gabriel, robed in white, holding a syringe. Jackson did not hesitate. He activated the live streaming unit. Rex's collar camera began transmitting. A blinking green light confirmed they were live. He loaded the tranquilizer into the pistol, but before he could fire, one of the robed figures spotted them. He shouted. The ritual exploded into chaos. Rex charged like a bolt of fury. He leaped, sank his teeth into Gabriel's arm just as he raised the syringe. The glass shattered on the floor. Gabriel screamed, not in pain, but in rage. He stumbled back, pulled a dagger carved with twisted symbols. Jackson reached the altar, cut the girl loose. He pulled her behind cover just as another cultist lunged. A kick landed in Jackson's ribs, but he did not fall. He swung the flashlight like a baton, cracked the attacker's jaw. The man dropped. Gabriel approached his face, no longer priestly, but monstrous. He muttered in a language not of this world. He raised his dagger. Jackson fired. The tranquilizer dart hit Gabriel's neck. He froze, eyes wide, then collapsed. Rex stood guard, fur bristling blood on his muzzle, but none of it his. Jackson looked around. The girl was safe. Gabriel was unconscious. The live stream was still running. The whole town was watching. Outside, the church bells rang. No one knew who was ringing them. But underground, the war had ended. St. Clair's church lit up in the middle of the night, not with candles or prayers, but with the flashing lights of police cars, ambulances, and a long line of townspeople standing in silence as if they had just woken from a shared dream. Jackson sat on the church steps, dried blood still on his hands, his eyes fixed on the screen of a young officer's phone. The live stream he had recorded from the basement was spreading faster than any sermon ever preached from St. Clair's pulpit. Millions of views, thousands of comments, outrage, horror, and even regret. No one called him that crazy night guard anymore. No one thought Rex was just a mad dog. They looked at him and at the dog as those who had pulled the entire town back from a cliff. They never realized they were falling off. Gabriel was wheeled away on a stretcher, bound hand and foot, still under the effects of sedation. But what left many people speechless was not him. It was what they found in the basement lists of names, stacks of recorded tapes, ritual documents, and dozens of urns filled with unidentified ashes. A federal officer approached Jackson and sat beside him. "We're taking you somewhere safe," he said. "You could be the key witness in an upcoming federal case. You might also be a target." Jackson shook his head. "I don't need to be safe. I just need you not to bury this again." The officer said nothing, but for the first time his eyes did not look at Jackson like he was some delusional old man. Rex now lay with his head on Jackson's leg, breathing heavily but still alert. He had survived 2 wars, and this time he had not only saved Jackson's life, but the soul of an entire town under control. The next morning, the media swarmed in. Jackson declined every interview. He agreed to say only one thing on live national television: never trust holiness if it does not allow you to ask questions. After that, he and Rex disappeared. No one knew where they went, but townsfolk would later say that sometimes on rainy nights they still saw a silver-haired man and a limping dog passing the edge of the woods where the light from the old church no longer reached. St. Clair's Church was sealed off, but inside on moonless nights, people claimed to still hear faint tapping on the stone walls. Some said it was the sound of unnamed souls. Others whispered, "No, that's Jackson still standing watch." A week later, headlines across the United States had not stopped covering what happened in Auburn Ridge. Major networks called it the most shocking church expose of the decade. Screenshots from the livestream Gabriel in white robes holding a syringe filled with blood had become the symbol of faith manipulated under the mask of compassion. Investigations soon expanded into other states where Gabriel had once visited congregations. A vast network was uncovered featuring fake charity centers where so-called soul-cleansing rituals were performed under the guise of free psychological therapy. Many parents were devastated to learn that their children had attended spiritual retreats funded by the same organization. Several prominent figures in the local religious community were also investigated for ties to the Holy Purification Fellowship. Some publicly apologized, others quietly stepped down. The rest blamed Gabriel, calling him a lost demon. But the people of Auburn Ridge knew better. Evil does not always scream. Sometimes it preaches. Meanwhile, Jackson and Rex vanished completely off the grid. Journalists, paparazzi, even CNN could not trace him. Some believed he had retired to a wooden cabin by a lake in Utah. Others said he was traveling across the country, silently guarding the places where the truth had yet to surface. Months later, an investigative reporter received an anonymous package. Inside was a duplicate hard drive containing documents and a previously unseen video showing Gabriel performing a purification rite on an underage boy. Included was a scribbled note: "This won't be the last." Federal authorities reopened the case. Shadows were pulled into the light, and in cabinet rooms in Washington, talks began about tightening regulations on unmonitored religious institutions. Back in the small town, a modest statue was erected behind the old church. No name, no plaque. Just the image of a man in a soldier's cap walking a dog, his eyes locked on the sealed basement door. Every day, someone places flowers there. No one knows who. But everyone understands some people do not need praise. They only need the truth not to be buried in silence. Right after the horrifying night at St. Clair Church, the front gate was sealed off with yellow tape reading, "Crime Scene, Do Not Cross." Federal police forensics crime scene sweep teams and special investigators from Washington poured into the town of Auburn Ridge once again, like a silent, crashing wave. The gloomy sky stretched over the entire week, as if even the weather was mourning what was about to be unearthed from beneath the ground. The basement of the church, once believed to store sacramental wine and ceremonial robes, had now become the scene of one of the most shocking ritual crime cases in modern American history. As the investigation team began digging through the rough concrete walls that Jackson had previously uncovered, they struck uneven layers of soil and then small wooden coffins. No names, no signs of identity. Just skeletal remains wrapped in black cloth, hurriedly buried as if to be hidden even from God. One by one, each coffin was brought up numbered and taken to the forensic examination lab. A total of 13 bodies were discovered, 8 adults and 5 children, all showing signs of having died while bound. Some bore small stab wounds to the left side of the chest, right where the heart is. Several of the victims still had strips of ceremonial robes wrapped around their necks or traces of holy oil on their foreheads. The media erupted. CNN, BBC, Reuters. The Guardian, dozens of reporters set up tents right in front of the church. A special news segment hosted by Anderson Cooper that evening opened with the line, "What happens when faith is twisted into a weapon?" Blurry images from Jackson's live stream, Gabriel in a white ceremonial robe holding a syringe, flickering firelight across his face, were broadcast nationwide over and over again. The Tennessee Council of Bishops held an emergency meeting. Human rights groups called for an independent investigation committee. Dozens of people who had once been part of former parishes where Gabriel had served began speaking up. They shared stories of inner healing sessions through faith and now realized those were only a front for bizarre rituals. The FBI held a press conference. A spokesperson said, "We are expanding the investigation into what appears to be a criminal organization operating under the guise of religion with acts of intentional murder and psychological abuse." Another statement rang out clearly. This is no longer an isolated case. This is a network. The gates of hell had been opened, and it all began with the bark of a dog. When the basement of St. Clair Church was unearthed, many believed they had reached the depths of horror. But for the FBI, it was only the beginning. In a closed-door meeting held inside the Special Analysis Room at the Southern Division FBI headquarters, criminologists, scholars of ancient rituals, and forensic investigators each presented their findings. The markings on the victims' bodies, the placement of the wounds, the arrangement of the coffins, and the symbols drawn in holy oil matched precisely with descriptions found in texts detailing the ritual known as the 13th Blood Circle, a mysterious sect once listed by the Vatican as a dangerous heresy and believed to have gone extinct since the 19th century. More than that, when carefully examining the evidence recovered from the basement, the team discovered a leather-bound notebook, partially burned, containing passages written in ancient Latin interspersed with Norse rune symbols. One line still legible on the final page made everyone's blood run cold. "The truth will rise where the light is weakest. None among them was the first, and none shall be the last." That line was written in blood. The FBI widened the investigation. The locations where Pastor Gabriel had previously served, from Illinois to Louisiana, were all locked down and combed through. Then 3 more old churches were discovered with signs of unauthorized structural modifications beneath the foundations. In a small church located in the Appalachian Mountains, police uncovered an underground room, its walls covered in symbols identical to those in the basement of St. Clair. But there were no bodies. Only blood-stained chain marks and dozens of wooden statues with their heads cut off. Another detail stunned the authorities. According to assignment records, Gabriel was not the founder of the sect, but merely a successor. And before him, there had been at least 3 pastors who bore the code name Keeper of the Flame, the internal title for the celebrant in the blood circle ritual. No one knew their names. All records had been erased. The only person who could verify any of it, Jackson Keller, had vanished without a trace. Federal intelligence now believes this is not an individual crime. It is an underground organization that has existed for hundreds of years, using religion as its cover, infiltrating the structure of traditional churches. In a classified internal FBI report, the headline was written in bold, "The network is active, and it has never stopped." Less than a week after the FBI's press conference, an urgent report from the Nashville field office arrived at headquarters. A small church called St. Jude's Hollow, hidden deep in an old oak forest, near the Tennessee border, where Pastor Gabriel had once served 17 years ago, had been broken into in the middle of the night. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. But in the chapel, a message had been written in black ash across the altar cloth. The first light has gone out. A new tongue of flame will rise from the ashes. The strange part. This place had been without electricity and without a caretaker for 6 years. Dust covered the entire floor, but the footprints were fresh. And most importantly, beneath the altar, investigators found a hollowed-out prayer book. Inside it was a roll of film, the kind only used in old surveillance cameras. The FBI quickly restored the footage. The clip lasted exactly 66 seconds. No image. Just a black screen, the sound of breathing through a filter, and in the final second, a human voice, whispering in Latin, repeating one single phrase, 3 times, successionem ignis. Successionem ignis. Successionem ignis. The succession of fire. The succession of fire. The succession of fire. All clues pointed to one possibility: Gabriel was not the mastermind. He was a chosen vessel trained to carry the flame to each parish, each community, then disappear, so another could take his place. A special task force was dispatched to New Orleans, where Gabriel once studied theology and was introduced to the order. At the library of the old seminary, a retired professor shared that in over 25 years of teaching, a few students had always struck him as unusual. They rarely spoke mastered ancient languages and often gathered secretly after night classes. One name stayed with him: Malachi Duval. No records, no graduation. But his face, captured in an old class photo from the 1998 theology program, was right behind Gabriel. His eyes stared directly at the camera. No smile. And the detail that sent chills through the agents: the photo was taken more than 25 years ago. Yet, when compared with CCTV footage recently leaked from Boston just last week, that face had not changed. Not a single wrinkle. No sign of aging. Whispers began to spread among investigators. Could the successor be something beyond human? Or was it a role passed from one follower to another? The question was no longer just, who will be next? It was, did Jackson already know who it was? Because according to cell phone location data retrieved from the night after the St. Clair mine collapse, his last recorded signal was not from the National Forest. It was from a bus stop in the suburbs of Boston, just 11 miles away, or about 18 kilometers from where the CCTV clip was taken. Boston, late May, damp and thick with the scent of moss-covered stone. A light drizzle painted the streets, soaking the cobblestones like the tears of something unnamed. The air was no longer cold, but no one felt warm. The maple trees lining Dorchester Avenue had begun to bud, but the light filtering through them cast long, dark shadows, like remnants of guilt that refused to fade. At an abandoned church on the outskirts of the city, once a theological seminary where Gabriel used to walk, a frail old man and his dog stood before the splintered wooden doors. In his hand was a thin chain rusted from the night air. Beside him, Rex stood tall and silent, like a living bronze statue. No one knew when he had left Auburn Ridge. No one knew who had led him there. But when Jackson Keller placed his hand on the rotting door and gently pushed it open, without a sound. Inside the church, the fading twilight filtered through broken stained glass, casting fractured beams of light across the floor like memories never fully formed. The pews were thick with dust. The stone altar in the center stood cold and still. Yet on it, a single candle burned its flame, small, flickering like the breath of a soul just beginning to wake. Rex growled softly, then stepped forward. Jackson followed each step, weighted as if carrying centuries on his back. The steel door leading to the basement was already ajar. He did not knock. He simply entered. Sitting in the dark was Malachi Duval, still as young as he appeared in the photo from 25 years ago. black hair, ageless face, eyes sharp as ice-forged steel. No greeting, no surprise, just a quiet glance upward. So the old flame finally wandered in, he said, his voice smooth as a dagger's edge. Jackson said nothing. He opened a worn leather notebook. No words, just letting the light fall on the last page. There was no name, only a blank space, and below it, in faded black ink, "Next Keeper of the Flame." Malachi looked at the words, then smiled, not with joy, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. "Are you here to kill me, or just to make me vanish like the others?" Jackson spoke slowly, his voice rough like sand caught in damp wind. "No, I came to stand guard. Guard what Malachi narrowed his eyes. Those who do not yet know, they are about to be chosen." The candle went out. Darkness fell thick and absolute. Wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the scent of age funerals and a future yet to be shaped. The next morning, the FBI arrived. No one was there. No signs of struggle. No blood. No body. But there was one strange detail. On the stone altar lay a silver ring, its surface etched with a spiral cross, the symbol Gabriel once wore, the one Malachi once carried, now worn by no one. Only a trail of paw prints remained, pressed into the damp dust, leading toward the woods behind the church. A narrow path cut through the oaks, then vanished into the mist. Weeks later, a bus driver in rural Connecticut recalled giving a ride to an old man with a brown dog on the last trip of the day. The man said nothing, only smiled as he looked westward. When asked where he was headed, he simply replied, "To the place where the darkness is about to begin." Since then, no one has seen Jackson Keller. But in each town and every abandoned church where signs of the old rituals once lingered, people still sometimes report a faint bark in the dead of night, or glimpses of two shadows, man and dog, standing silently under the street lamp, then fading like morning fog. No one knows if he is still alive, but everyone knows, though he has stepped away from the light, he still walks where secrets have yet to speak. Some truths do not shine light on everything, but they are enough to awaken a sleeping conscience. This story is not just about crime. It is a whisper of justice, quiet, persistent, needing no spotlight. Because when faith is betrayed, the only thing that can lift us up again is not forgiveness, but a truth that is no longer buried. Thank you for following this story to its final breath. We will meet again in the cases still unsolved where the shadows remain, but the flame of justice has never truly gone out.